into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. Today, we are talking Week 3 Waiver Wire. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge. Dave, fantasy football just it just breaks our heart right now. There's been so many injuries, so many crazy things go. Sam Darnold and Derek Carr are the best quarterbacks in the league right now. This is where we're at. It feels like none of the
Jordan
players
Mason and J.K. Dobbins are leading the league in rushing.
What is going on? Why? How
Baker
is this
Mayfield
happening?
is the QB2 in fantasy scoring, just like we
That was the
all
other
imagined.
Yep. That was the other one. So after a crazy week 2, we're going to hop into the week 3 waiver wire, talk to you guys about which players we are suggesting that you pick up. Now, there are some players that we have not quite put on this list, mostly either because they should already be rostered or they're already rostered in too many leagues, or no, we're just not quite ready to put them on here yet. So let's go over some of these honorable mentions, Dave, and maybe there's one here that you really like on this list. But Rico Dowdle led the running backs in snaps, carries, and targets for the Cowboys in week 2. Blake Corum, who you talked about it last week, of him being dropped in so many leagues. He got dropped in a bunch more leagues, but he saw some action late. Kyron has not really looked great rushing the football, but the usage is still there. The offensive line is really bad, so I know that. Don't hurt me in the comments. Bucky Irving, this guy we talked about last week, Rachaad White, continues to look pretty rough. The carries were split 10-7, so it looks like there's a growing role for him there. Josh Downs.
Rachaad White did get banged up in the game and left for a while, so I think that could have skewed the usage a little bit, but you're right, he still looks bad.
I mean,
second week in a row, he's finished bottom 3 in rushing yards over expectation. I mean, he's just not very good at rushing the ball. Great at catching the ball, but not great at rushing it.
Yeah, the amount of times I see that man running to his offensive lineman's back, it's rough. It's rough. Josh Downs coming back, or hopefully coming back. He was almost able to suit up this past week. Adonai Mitchell and Ashton Dulin would likely be the odd men out there, so Downs potentially comes back into a decent role. Sam Darnold is a guy who, I mean, he could probably have just been on this list, but quarterback 3 in week 2. He's got the Texans defense next week. That Texans defense has looked good, but that could be a potential shootout. I mean, he was quarterback 3 against the San Francisco 49ers. So Sam Darnold might become a spot starter. And then a name we haven't said in a long time, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, with the whole situation going on, the running back situation in Kansas City. We're going to be talking about that today on the waiver wire. But Dave, is there a name here that sticks out to you as someone who absolutely needs to be picked up on waivers?
I think CH is the one that jumps out to me. I don't feel great about any of these running backs, and we're going to talk about them quite a bit. It sounds like Isaiah Pacheco could be missing 6 to 8 weeks with a fibula fracture. Definitely not what you want to hear for anybody who ponied up a second round pick for Isaiah Pacheco this year. But I think we're going to see a bit of a mix here. I just worry that Carson Steele and Samaje Perine are both very one-dimensional in what they can do. Carson Steele is going to be getting early down and goal line work. Samaje Perine is going to be getting passing down work. Clyde Edwards-Helaire might not be a specialist in either of those, but he does have the flexibility to kind of do it all. Like, he can get going as a pass catcher, he can get going near the goal line, he can get going in between the 20s. So I think just the versatility for Clyde Edwards-Helaire makes him my favorite of the 3 standing backs in Kansas City. Of course, he's on IR now, but you can pick him up. If you got an IR spot, just stash him on your IR, hold him for the next 2 weeks, and then you could be potentially getting the most valuable of the 3 standing Kansas City running backs 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, and I think that the rest of these running backs here are in a bit of a holding pattern. I know we saw Rico Dowdle get more of the touches for the Cowboys. Their upcoming schedule is pretty rough, and I don't know that we're going to see any one of these running backs just totally run away with this job, pun absolutely intended. Listen, if you rostered Blake Corum and you kept him, you know what you're doing, and you're going to hold on to him. If you let him go, you're not grabbing him back off of the waiver wire. I think maybe the only guy I might look at here from the running back spot is going to be Bucky Irving, who could just end up taking a good role in a good offense too. Like, that's the big thing there. So Josh Downs, you and I talked about him a lot in the offseason. If he can come back into this Colts offense and have some sort of role, I'm willing to spend a couple of waiver wire dollars on that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the Colts a little bit more. Pecking order, the target tree, whatever you want to call it, isn't really shaking out the way that we had expected it to thus far. But like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones says, chaos is a ladder, and it's chaotic right now in Indy. And who knows, maybe Josh Downs can climb that ladder.
He is a wee fella. He would definitely need a ladder or a step stool, something. All right, we got 17 waiver wire pickups for you guys here before week 3. So we're going to hop into these right here. And this is our bottom tier. We'll call this tier number 4. And I'm going to list 5 players for you, Dave. I want you to pick one of these that you are willing to spend the free agent auction budget or your waiver wire priority access, whichever you want to call it, on here. So at 17, we've got Mike Gesicki, tight end for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's available in 90% of leagues. At 16, Geno Smith, quarterback for the Seahawks, available in 71% of sleeper leagues. At 15, Derek Carr, available in 79% of leagues. 14, Cam Akers, available in 97% of leagues. And then at 13, D'Onta Foreman, surprisingly big workload last week. Running back for the Cleveland Browns, he is available in 99% of leagues. So between Gesicki, Smith, Carr, Akers, and Foreman, which one of these guys stands out to you?
I'm gonna go with Akers. We are recording this early Monday morning. It's a little bit after 11 a.m. Eastern. We just recently got news from Tom Pelissero that Joe Mixon's going to be undergoing an MRI or an X-ray. They're going to be taking a closer look at his foot. Could be an ankle sprain, but we got to remember Joe Mixon. It was just a few years ago that he dealt with this kind of mysterious foot injury where he was like day to day for several weeks, and then they inevitably ended up shutting down his season, and he only played about 4.5 games that year. So I don't want to say that's where we are heading, but this is a guy who is suffered Liz Frank injuries in the past, has had a history of foot and ankle issues. So my panic meter is starting to beep a little bit with Joe Mixon. And what we saw yesterday is that after Joe Mixon went down, Cam Akers came in and had 7 touches compared to Dare Ogunbowale's 2 touches. So it just seems like he is the guy who would be second in line to get any work here. Seen Damian Pierce, currently dealing with an injury, but he hasn't really been a good fit for this new Bobby Slowick zone rushing scheme. So for me, it's Akers, a guy who has some foot, ankle, Achilles injuries of his own, but seems to be mostly healthy at this point. So Akers would be the guy that I'd pick up. Had no confidence in starting him unless we get word that Joe Mixon is out. But next week, if they say Joe Mixon can't go for whatever reason, I think we can look at Akers as kind of a low end RB2 flex play that you can plug into your lineup with just a little wee bit of confidence, maybe.
I love and hate where we're at in fantasy football. Like, I love that we're seeing players that haven't been productive for a while get that opportunity to shine again. But I hate that we are sitting here having to make these calls in week 3. It's gross. It feels
Yeah.
yucky. I didn't think we'd be talking about Dare Ogunbowale on the week 3 waiver wire show, but here we are. If I'm going to go with a guy from this group, I kind of really like, yeah, good, strong stance, Alfredo. D'Onta Foreman, running back for the Cleveland Browns here. And this is a guy that we had talked about on our last picks to make episode. This was back, I want to say, like a month ago, of like players that you want to draft in the last round. And D'Onta Foreman was one of those guys where we said, you're not going to see a whole lot of Nick Chubb, or maybe if any, like, we don't know. But this is a backfield that he could take the reins on. And we started to see that a little bit. Now, he was still out snapped by Jerome Ford, now targeted by Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford ran more routes, but D'Onta Foreman, 14 carries to Jerome Ford 7. D'Onta Foreman was out there for all of the goal line work, most of the early down work. And this is a lot more of a 50-50 split than I think we might have projected. And there's even still some Pierre Strong. So if Jerome Ford is potentially getting relegated to less early down work, more passing work, and then you got Pierre Strong in the mix there as well, taking passing down work, D'Onta Foreman might become the guy to have in Cleveland. And I'm not saying go out there and spend a bunch of money on it, but I would be willing to throw a couple bucks here and there at D'Onta Foreman and be able to roster him as like a running back 4 on my fantasy team. That just sounds fantastic here in week 3.
Yeah, it's just mind-numbing usage too with D'Onta Foreman. We talked about him a little bit this offseason as a guy who could be a good fit here, as a good complementary piece to Jerome Ford, where Jerome Ford has the speed and the pass catching ability. D'Onta Foreman is just a bludgeoning hammer in between the tackles. That's what he does best. And then we see 0 touches in week 1. So I cut D'Onta Foreman from so many teams last week because he was a guy that I was regularly targeting at the end of my draft. We see no work in week 1. And then he all of a sudden comes out with 14 touches in week 2. I don't know what to really make of this backfield in Cleveland right now, but I do think D'Onta Foreman is a talented player. And absolutely, I'm going to be throwing 2 to 3% of my fab on D'Onta Foreman just to stash him because, like you said, we don't know what's happening with Nick Chubb, but there's also the contingent upside. Like if something happens to Jerome Ford, then we're looking at D'Onta Foreman with almost no competition in this Cleveland backfield.
Yeah, it's we're at that weird point in the season already where you're just like, I'll take whatever running back is there on
You
any
got a
team.
pulse and you're getting double digit touches. Welcome to the RB2 slot, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, the zero RB drafters have never felt better than this season right now. It's just it's nuts. It's
I
absolutely
feel
nuts.
like I've been doing this for a while now. Fantasy football content creation, and I wanted so badly yesterday to tweet out like this is the worst injuries have ever been. But I tweeted it out last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. It's just the nature of football. And like every single year when we're in the heat of it, we feel like, wow, injuries have never been this bad before. But it's just how it is. And I think that's why zero RB is starting to pick up in popularity because there were a lot of people that started their drafts this year with Christian McCaffrey and Isaiah Pacheco and felt really, really good going into week one. And now here they are going into week three without their top two picks. And of course, Cooper Kupp got hurt too, and Justin Jefferson and Amon St. Brown. There were a ton of injuries this week, but it's just the nature of the NFL. And I think Sigmund Bloom says it best. He always says that fantasy football is a war of attrition, and it certainly feels like it already just less than 2 weeks into the season.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of war of attrition, this tier that we're going to talk about is just players that have been getting opportunities due to other players not being available, or we've got some interesting names on here. And
Mm.
Dave, the first one that we're going to take a look at here is MarShawn Lloyd, running back for the Green Bay Packers. He's available in 77% of leagues. Next week, the Packers go up against Tennessee, and this was an offense that was greatly affected by injury with Jordan Love being out, and we weren't sure what this offense was going to look like, but oh my God, it's just the Green Bay Josh Jacobses, because 32 carries for him. And obviously, this is not something that's going to be sustainable week after week.
No.
But in this game, where there was a lot of running going on, we did see that MarShawn Lloyd actually emerged as a guy who's potentially second in the pecking order here. And he did finish the game with 6 carries and a target, just usage slightly ahead of the previous backup or who was out there on the field in week 2, Emmanuel Wilson, or excuse me, week 1, Emmanuel Wilson. So MarShawn Lloyd becomes a guy, Dave, that I think that we do have to pay a little bit of extra attention to. He was a rookie that I really liked coming out of USC, and we just didn't really like the spot for him because he was just stuck behind Josh Jacobs. But a role could come out of this.
Yeah, and I mean this is a day 2 running back, and day 2 draft capital for a running back is important, and he certainly got that. And he's a small guy in stature, just 5'9", but he's a little bowling ball, and he was getting some work yesterday. Now there were 58 rushing yards, I believe. I'm looking at my notes right now that I took. Is that right? Yeah, 58 rushing yard or 58 rushing attempts. 6 different players carried the ball. So I mean, I think this is going to be a very watered down offense where they want to make Malik Willis's job as easy as possible. So I think even for the next couple of weeks, we're probably going to continue to see a similar offense. It looks like they're targeting a week 5 return for Jordan Love. So I don't know if we're going to see 58 rushing attempts again next week, but if this is a team that's just going to commit to running the ball and doing, getting Jordan Reed and Emmanuel Wilson and MarShawn Lloyd involved in the rushing game and Malik Willis out there on some options and as well, there's going to be work for MarShawn Lloyd. So I'd have to be pretty desperate to find a way to plug him into my week 3 lineup. But I think with Lloyd, what we have been able to gather now that we saw him on the field is that he is the RB2 here. And if something happens to Jacobs, he's probably the guy that slots in to get a relatively big workload instead of Emmanuel Wilson, the guy that we were talking about after week 1.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, we're going to have to, once again, keep an eye on it. And I wouldn't be spending too much on MarShawn Lloyd because he did have the injury leading into the season. And sometimes those injuries can creep back up. But yeah, I mean, the talent's there. Hopefully the offense is there once Jordan Love returns. Seems like they didn't even need him. I don't know. The Packers game was just weird.
Yeah.
Next guy on here is another running back who we could see some opportunity for. We haven't quite seen it yet, but Dave, I'm going to give you a stat line here. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
24 rushes for 48 yards.
Is that DeAndre Swift?
That is what DeAndre Swift has done through 2 weeks here. And I think there is a real case to be made. And I think I tweeted this out like sort of tongue in cheek, but not really, where I was just like, Khalil Herbert might actually still be the best running back on the Bears. And he's been showing that year after year after year with his efficiency and the explosive plays he makes. And nothing right now in the usage has said, Khalil Herbert, you got to go out and grab him. But I think you and I watching, we've seen that this has not been pretty for DeAndre Swift. Now, the usage in the passing game is there. Khalil Herbert has been brought in on some of the more, let's call them important or valuable touches when they're
Mhm.
going forward and fourth down, when they're near the goal line, and we're oddly enough like not seeing any Roshan Johnson either. So Khalil Herbert becomes a guy that I think is just interesting. He's probably going under the radar. You probably have a lot of your league mates not even looking at him, and you can maybe on some of those leagues where you can throw $0 on the fab, you might be able to get him for free or just for a couple bucks.
Yeah, we're both big fans of Khalil Herbert, just a good football player. But I think a lot of this has less to do with Khalil Herbert being a good football player and more to do with DeAndre Swift.
Yeah.
You know, it's way too early in the season to be taking victory laps, but man, like I told you I had concerns about DeAndre Swift, and it's funny, like everybody knows the name, everyone remembers what he did in college, and everyone remembers the round two draft capital and the exciting plays and the highlights and all that. And like in the offseason when DeAndre Swift was signed, I'm a Chicago guy. All of my friends were just so excited that we got DeAndre Swift, this playmaking running back, this guy who's going to be hitting all these big plays. And I said, guys, like I've been watching this guy for years and I don't see it. Like the highlight reels are fantastic, but all of the little intricacies of playing the running back position, he just doesn't seem to have figured out. And if you watch the game yesterday, how many times did he shy away from contact? How many times did he go down before a defender hit him? How many times was he sprinting to the sideline rather than turning the ball upfield? And that's why he's averaging like just over 1 yard per carry. Like it hasn't been good so far. And of course, the offensive line is doing him no favors. But Khalil Herbert has played behind a bad offensive line in Chicago now for years and continues to be productive even with subpar offensive line play, something we can't say about DeAndre Swift. I think the other potential out here with Khalil Herbert, one, he's a good football player. Two, we see these injuries popping up all over the place. If Khalil Herbert ends up in Houston or if he ends up in Kansas City, then this is a guy that you're dropping 80% of your fab on. So I think he's worth picking up now because he's just arguably the most talented running back in Chicago. And two, he's got the out that he can land on a team that actually needs a running back and could immediately find himself in a more productive role.
I don't think I'm overstating this when I say that Khalil Herbert might be the best running back in the NFL. Too far?
Mm,
Too far. Okay, we went
maybe a
too
little
far.
too far. Maybe a little too far. He's darn good though. No, I will give it to him. He's good.
I've got such a damn crush on Khalil Herbert, man. Dude, it's just been so good throughout the years. I'm trying not to like I don't as an analyst, like we need to be impartial, right? And we don't want to let
Yeah.
fandom take over anything. And I really like a player, but I tend to like a player when they're good on the field, and that's what has happened with Khalil Herbert for years and years. So it's one of those things, like you said, Dave. It's not only just a war of attrition for injuries on these players, but it just kind of becomes a war of attrition of who is taking themselves out of the playing field just with poor play. And right now, DeAndre Swift is kind of on that path. Let's go to our next guy here, number 10, Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, and this was what's going on, man? How are the Saints this good? How did like the games don't make sense? It was a weird game script. Here's another one where the Cowboys were trailing the entire game, remained trailing the entire game. Jalen Tolbert ends up with the most snaps of any offensive player besides Dak Prescott, the quarterback, the most routes run, excuse me, and the most targets on the team. He out targeted CeeDee Lamb. Now, I think we can point to Jake Ferguson not being there. And,
Mhm.
I pointed out Brandon Cooks as a start of the week. And it turns out the production that I thought could go to Cooks ends up going to Jalen Tolbert.
Cooks was
Dave, I don't,
8th on the team in targets. Like, what were
I,
they doing? Why is Brandon Cooks 8th on the team in targets in this game?
Devontae Turpin's out there getting 3 targets. Jalen Brooks is getting 3 targets. And Brandon Cooks, they're like, you're going to run 37 routes, but we're only going to target you twice.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't get it. It was very, very strange usage, but Tolbert looked good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like in my opinion, he's always had this, and there's just sometimes there's players that they need time to put it together. But um, I don't know. I'm ready to call this the breakout. It just seems
No.
like very odd usage here, where he's leading the team in snaps, routes, and targets. That's just not something we're expecting to see a whole lot of, or the Cowboys being trailing by 2, 3 scores in a game like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not ready to say that this is like the breakout that we've been waiting for with Jalen Tolbert. He's a guy that we have 2 years of data where he hasn't really done much of anything at all, and he's dealt with some injuries. He's been inactive multiple times throughout his career, but this was by far the most yards he's ever had in a game, most targets he's ever had in a game, most receptions he's ever had in a game, and he did look pretty good doing it. So I don't want to completely write it off because Jalen Tolbert was a prospect that I liked, and he came from a small school, and those guys from small schools do take some time to warm up at the NFL level, and I'm willing to pick him up. I mean, he's not going anywhere near my week 3 roster, but if I'm on or in a fantasy league that has like 7+ bench spots and I need some depth there, I think it's worth picking him up just to kind of see what happens. The reality is, a guy who's done what he's done through this point in his career rarely breaks out in any sort of relevant role, but we know he's a good prospect. And, it's just kind of been injuries and lack of playing time so far that have kept him at bay. Now the opportunity is there. He's on the field. He's a full-time player. He's running a ton of routes. He's getting a lot of snaps. So I think it's worth it to stash him just to kind of see what could happen here, but I'm not going crazy. I mean, this is like a 1, 2, 3% type of player only if you need wide receiver depth.
Now, there's a similar guy that I want to talk about here that comes up next on this list at number 9. Alec Pierce, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. And this is another guy who did not expect him to be leading the team in
Nope.
week 2 in snaps and routes run and targets, but here we are. And there seems to be some sort of chemistry that's going on between Pierce and Anthony Richardson that is not quite happening with the rookie that everyone really wanted to love, AD Mitchell. Now, there have been times where plays have been called back and whatever may happen. We're not seeing the same kind of crazy volume for Michael Pittman Jr. It seems like Shane Steichen and the Colts really want to spread this ball around. And this was a game where the passing attack should have just been able to flourish. They were down by so many points. There should have been a ton of volume here in the passing game, and it didn't quite come to fruition for some of these other guys. But Alec Pierce continues to be a guy who kind of said, I don't know that I want to buy in totally after week 1. And then here we are after week 2 saying, oh, okay, this might be like a real thing. Now, granted, Josh Downs is not back yet, and that could change a lot of things. But Alec Pierce, Dave, he becomes a guy who's 77% available in fantasy leagues. And I have a feeling that number is going to go way down after another big performance.
And I mean, the volume kind of was there. Like Anthony Richardson attempted almost twice as many passes this week as he did in week 1. The problem is, like, he completed 50% of them after completing less than 50% of them
Yeah.
last week. And he had 3 interceptions. And I believe, did he have 2 fumbles or was it 1 fumble? 3 interceptions and 2 fumbles. Luckily, neither fumble was lost, but man, coughing the ball 5 times in one game is not something you want to see from a quarterback. So I think that, we talked about it a little bit with Josh Downs at the opening of the show. This isn't really shaking out the way that we expected it to in Indianapolis, where Pittman is still getting the targets, but they're such low value targets. I mean, he is running his routes 3 to 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. He's given almost no after the catch abilities, and he doesn't seem to be getting on the same page with Anthony Richardson. So I don't know if it's a crazy overreaction at this point, but I'm willing to say, like, my week 3 rankings are probably going to have Alec Pierce ahead of Michael Pittman because they have just displayed some sort of connection that Pittman and Richardson haven't been able to do together. Alec Pierce had more receptions and yards than Michael Pittman, despite both of them having 7 targets. He had the lone touchdown on the day as well. This was a game where Richardson was spreading it out quite a bit. He targeted 10 different players. But I think Alec Pierce, 1, has the big play upside like we saw in week 1, but 2 also has some trust from Richardson that I think is surprising to all of us. So to be completely honest, I mean, outside of like your 12-team leagues where you're starting 3+ wide receivers, you're probably not pining to fit Alec Pierce into your lineup. Once Josh Downs gets back in the mix, that's just going to muddy the water even a little bit more. I probably don't want to start any Colts wide receivers, but I think my rankings heading into week 2 or heading into week 3 are going to have a preference for Pierce over Pittman and Downs right now.
So these last 2 games have been the best 2 games of Alec Pierce's career. Are you buying in that it's a breakout, or are you buying in that there's just opportunity with Josh Downs out and it's been 2 fluky games in a row?
See, Pierce and Downs don't really play similar roles in the offense, so I don't know
They
if this
don't,
is
but
like
that means still less targets for Pierce once Downs is there.
fewer targets for sure, but this also could be like a thing where when Josh Downs is back in the fold, rising tide lifts all boats, maybe then the whole passing attack just gets a little bit better because Downs works so much across the middle of the field. Pierce works so much outside of the numbers that you've got to imagine that they're going to be able to have some sort of symbiotic relationship between the two. I think Pittman is the guy here who really is the surprising. I don't want to use the term loser, but for lack of a better term, loser, what we expected, like last year, Minshew was willing to just pepper Pittman across the middle of the field. And that's not really Anthony Richardson's game. Like he would rather take off and run than make the 3-yard pass to Pittman. So I think Pierce and Downs both running their routes deeper downfield. I think that's just what the Colts want to do is they want Anthony Richardson to just be this hammer that just wears down defenses. And then when the defenses start to cheat up a little bit and defend against that run, then he can take the shots over the top, and those are going to go to Pierce and Downs. So I feel like Michael Pittman, like we know he's a pretty good player. He's not in the elite tier of wide receivers by any means, but he's probably in that like top 15 to top 25 range, somewhere in there on a talent basis. But I just don't know if he's a good fit for the offense that they're running with Anthony Richardson. So we're talking about Alec Pierce and we're talking about Josh Downs, but really, like if this weren't a waiver wire show and if this were like a panic meter episode, my panic meter on Michael Pittman has got to be at like an 8 or 9 out of 10 right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's pretty fair. I will say this. I think I'm going to be a little bit of a wet blanket here on Alec Pierce. And I think it's hard for us to say he can sustain the 2 best performances of his career. If he does, okay, I'm going to waffle right here live on air and kind of flip flop, because even though I don't think it is necessarily indicative of a player who's going to continue to be really good throughout the season, I'd rather take the chance on him on waivers and be wrong than miss out on that, if that makes sense. It's the what can you live with theory. And I don't know that I could live with not putting my waiver wire money on him. I can be wrong. I can put the waiver wire fab on him, be wrong, and be like, okay, well, I went after a player who showed the signs of a massive breakout, and it just didn't happen. Now, at the same time, like reasonability tells us catching 8 balls and 10 targets for 2 touchdowns and almost 200 yards, probably not sustainable. But there's different ways that he can continue to earn targets. So, yeah, all right. I waffled on air. Look at me being strong stance.
I think he's worth stashing. Again, like he's probably not a guy that I'm pining to put in. And I think that's kind of the theme with this week's waivers. There's no guys that like, you got to throw 100% of your fab on this guy and get him in your week 3 lineup. This is a lot of like, hey, these guys are drawing some buzz. They're getting some interesting usage. Pick them up, stash them on your bench, see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, speaking of players, yeah.
I just want to say, hey, preseason, we did talk about Quentin Johnston as a guy to pick up before the season kicked off, and
you did.
I did, and I'll go back to it.
I'm gonna let you keep that one because I'm not quite there yet. I will say the touchdown catch that he made over who was the corner? I can't remember, but it was like it was a really good play. It was a good play that we have not seen Quentin Johnston make.
Horn, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
I mean, that's kind of what we saw a lot of at TCU was him making contested catches.
No, he was terrible at contested catches. He made a lot of catches over the middle.
Was like Keon Coleman. He had Keon Coleman where his contested catch rate was terrible, but he had the fun contested catch highlight like we saw on yesterday.
Yeah, he would get 1 out of who he is. Quentin Johnston is Fulton Reed from the Mighty Ducks. 1 out of 5. But that one was really, oh my God, Dave, you're giving me the look. Have you not seen Mighty Ducks?
No.
Oh my.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Fantasy show at footballguys.com. Email us. All of the youth sporting movies Dave needs to watch. Fantasy show at footballguys.com.
Yeah.
Dave, you have not seen Mighty Ducks? There's 3 films, sir.
Films. That's what we're calling these films.
They're films. Oh, I'm sorry. What else would you call it when Emilio Estevez leads a group of ragtag teenagers from Minnesota to a Pee Wee hockey championship, and then they get scholarships to go to high school together? Yeah. Cinema.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen that one. I'm sorry. I wasn't. I don't know.
What, you weren't a child?
Passed by me.
You were.
I wasn't big into live action movies as a kid. I don't know. I just never saw it. Just passed me by for some reason. And now I'm like 34. I'm not going to go watch the Mighty Ducks.
You absolutely should. Wait, okay, so let's pack this down. Unpack this. You weren't into live action movies as a child, but now, if I get this correct, you don't like animated films. Like you
No.
hit like a hard stop.
Yeah, Bob's Burgers is, like, the only animated thing that I really like watching. I don't know what it is. I just, like, the Disney original movies never did it for me. I don't think I've ever seen any of them. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
just, I had a terrible childhood apparently.
I feel like you turned 7 and just immediately left the house and got a job.
Yeah,
And
just
that
lit a
was it.
cigarette and started working in the coal mines. At 7 years old, I didn't have time for Mighty Ducks. But no, like, all these movies, like, I hear people talk about them all the time. I'm looking right now, like, Brink and Johnny Tsunami and,
Whoa,
never saw any of them.
my dog. Okay. Movie night,
Sorry,
football
sorry.
guys. We're doing it. Next football guys retreat, movie night. Anyways, Quentin Johnston, Fulton Reed of the
I wish I understood that reference.
so he's like this one kid on the team that like doesn't really play hockey, but he's really big, really strong, and he just hits a slap shot that is horribly inaccurate but incredibly powerful. And it's like, it's like the hokey thing where like the puck will go through the goalie's mitt and like break through the net and crack the glass and all that. And he's like 12, so it's ridiculous. But it's Quentin Johnston. He makes a really, really good play, 1 out of 5. And what we saw here this week was 6 targets, catches 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions on those 6 targets. I think this is what you draft Quentin Johnston for, is the boom games. I just don't know that you ever know when it's going to happen. This felt like this could be one of the times that it happens, and you're probably going to be waiting the rest of the season. This is a team that they threw the ball 19 times, Dave.
Yeah,
I don't know that I want to
they
bet
like
on
to
that
run it.
in the future. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't know that I want to bet on that in the future with Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I mean, again, this just kinda comes down to, like, if somebody's going to step up in this wide receiver room, I'd expect it to be Quentin Johnston, and, there hasn't
McConkey.
really been a yeah, I mean, like, Lad McConkey has been there as well, but, I'm trying to pull it up right now. I believe, I could be wrong, but I think Quentin Johnston is a target leader through 2 weeks. I mean, he saw 5 targets in week 1, saw 6 targets in week 2. He's got the 2 touchdowns. The usage hasn't been fantastic because they haven't been throwing all that much, but Quentin Johnston, former first round pick who didn't really do much in his rookie season, was kind of shoehorned into an awful role for his skill set. It seems like now they're doing what we wanted to see them do, throwing him shorter passes across the middle of the field and allowing him to make plays on the ball and make plays after the catch. So, I've got Quentin Johnston in quite a few leagues. Again, not a guy that I'm clamoring to put into my week 3 lineup, but I'm definitely intrigued by the usage and the production so far.
So let's do this. Would you rather have Quentin Johnston or Alec Pierce?
Quentin Johnson, just because I have
Hmm.
a lot more faith in Justin Herbert than I have in Anthony Richardson as a passer.
Okay. Also, write it down. Go watch Mighty Ducks, Dave. What the hell are you doing? All right. Next player on here, Braelon Allen, running back for the New York Jets. Dave, this is another guy who he made the most of his opportunity. He got some touchdowns. He's getting usage in the passing game. I say all this. Brees Hall is not in any danger of losing snaps or touches to Braelon Allen, or at least not in any immediate danger. But I think what the Jets are seeing here is they do have a
Brees Hall
guy
is
that they can
basically the
rely
wide
on.
receiver one in New York right now. Like they are just
That Listen,
he's
that
getting
catch
so much
on the
work in the
touchdown
passing
was
game.
nuts.
Yeah, unbelievable. Like I was going nuts over that. Like you don't see running backs make that catch. He is unbelievable as a pass catcher.
And like so much of it is like the Jets just can't do anything else either. I mean,
Right.
Brees Hall coming down with 8 targets on this. I mean, the running has been rough for Brees, at least in week 1 against the Niners, and then once again against the Titans. It wasn't too bad, but it's been the receiving game that everything is showing up there, and I think that's been kind of the good news here for Braelon Allen as well, who 7 carries, 4 targets in the game. He ends up with a touchdown, or was it 2 touchdowns? It was,
2
yeah, two
touchdowns,
touchdowns in
receiving
this
and a
game.
rushing. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, he's also looked good. And by the way, you and I were not as high on Braelon Allen coming out of college. This does not look like the same player on
Mm.
the field right now.
He
This is
slimmed
not.
down and sped up. He was
Yeah,
like a bulky, slower guy at Ohio State, and now I don't know if he's dropped some weight or if it's
Wisconsin.
just been better conditioning, but like he looks way faster than he looked last year at Ohio or at Wisconsin, not Ohio State.
Wisconsin, yeah.
Wisconsin,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like that he was bulky, is that he really wasn't using that bulk to run over players. And I think the weight loss has made him, like you said, more explosive. He's actually seeking out contact and winning on that contact. And that was really not something we had seen since his freshman year in college. But he looks good. He seems to be the primary backup for this team. And it looks like you're probably not ever going to be starting him on a weekly basis, but this is. I mean, maybe. I mean,
If there's
we have.
one guy on the show that we're talking about that, like, so far has some sort of flex appeal, it might be Braelon Allen. And
Ah,
let me drop a nugget for you real
okay.
quickly here. We know Aaron Rodgers, if you watched him play, he clearly still has the arm, but there's almost no athleticism, there's no mobility. I mean, it is him dropping back and just getting the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. And that makes sense for a guy who's over 40 years old and coming off of a surgically repaired Achilles tendon. 41.3% of his targets yesterday went to running backs. So that's where I'm kind of at. Maybe in your PPR leagues, there could be some weekly value in using Braelon Allen as a potential RB2 or a flex player because he is way more involved in the passing game than I think either of us predicted. And there's still enough going around where Brees Hall can be a 20-25% target share guy, and there could still be another 15% that goes Braelon Allen's way. And if Braelon Allen is pulling a 15% target share, even as the team's RB2, there's going to be value there in PPR leagues. So I do like what I've seen from Braelon Allen so far. And you look at the touches as a whole. I mean, like you said, Brees Hall is still in no danger of losing touches or anything like that. Still dominating targets, still dominating the opportunities, but it was essentially a 2-to-1 split. Hall was a lot more involved. He was getting about 33% of the carries and targets out of the backfield, which I think people were surprised by. But I think that Rodgers is going to throw so many targets to running backs that both of these guys, Brees Hall and Braelon Allen, could have some weekly value.
I'm intrigued to see what happens with this Jets offense when they're not going up against defenses that are this good.
Yeah.
Because week one, we didn't really see target volume for Braylon Allen. It was Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall. But we also didn't see anything for Mike Williams in week one. That number went up for Mike Williams going into week two. We still haven't seen anything for Malachi Corley. What I don't want us to do and what I don't want our audience to do is just continue to chase touchdowns when we see, like, whether it's, and I'm sorry to like list all the players we just talked about, whether it's Quentin Johnston or Alec Pierce or Braylon Allen, and say, well, this player has 2 touchdowns on 10 or 12 touches or less. That is so hard to sustain. And we do this every single year where we jump at this opportunity, be like, this could be the breakout guy. This could be the breakout guy. I think there's more that needs to go along with it than just the touchdowns. That's why I think I'm willing to do that with Alec Pierce. I don't know that I'm willing to do that right now with Braylon Allen. I do think this offense still needs to take shape a little bit more. Getting 2 catches in week 2 on the 4 targets after getting 1 target the week prior, it doesn't quite do it for me, Dave.
And see, it's just what I see is that a rookie in his first NFL game ever was very limited. And then going into his second game, he saw his snap share double. He saw his target volume quadruple. He saw his carry volume go up by 7. So I think this could just be them like, hey, let's take it easy with Braylon Allen in week 1. He's a very young rookie. And then his role grows in week 2, and his role could grow in week 3. 2 points is way, it's not enough to identify a trend here, but I think that when you see a rookie with a growing role heading into week 3, that's not something I want to scoff at. So, touchdowns aside, just the snap rate, targets, carries, all of that has gone up. The touchdowns are a nice little cherry on top that almost nobody benefits from because nobody was starting Braelon Allen this week. But for me, it's the intriguing usage more so than just the touchdowns.
For me, I think I lean a bit more towards the handcuff thing. That if sure he has some of that value you're talking about right now. I
Yeah.
don't know that I'll ever put him into my lineup, even in a multi-flex
Yeah.
lineup.
But if Brees
Depends
goes
on,
down, he's a league winner.
and that's exactly it. If
Yeah.
Brees goes down, that 5 to 10% of fab that you spent on Braylon Allen after week 2 becomes the thing that saved that won you your league, right? And we're not hoping that Brees goes down or anything like that, but we're already seeing early on. You need to have these insurance policies. And let's go to our next player on here. It's another running back who is in a quote backup role or handcuff role, and he's getting usage in the passing game, or at least has throughout his career. We saw Antonio Gibson actually come to life here, week 2 for the Patriots. And by the way, the Patriots are looking a little bit better than we all thought. And here's Antonio Gibson getting 11 carries. I know Ramondre Stevenson is still the clear running back 1 on this team, but on 16 snaps, Antonio Gibson saw 12 opportunities
Hmm.
I don't think that's anything for us to turn our noses at. This is a guy who's probably going to get a bit more usage as the season goes on. There's just not a lot of good offensive weapons on this team. If there is a team that I could see deploying 2 running backs as often as possible, it's the New England Patriots.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a lot of that. You know, it was very much so the Ramondre Stevenson show in week one, but like you said, like the opportunity to snap ratio for Antonio Gibson this week was crazy. Like when he was on the field, they were getting him the ball, and he had a 20-yard carry, he had a 45-yard carry, he had two other carries of 10+ yards. I mean, he was ripping off some big plays here, and out of
He looked
his
good.
96 yards, 54 of them came, beyond expectation. So he was making plays outside of what was given to him. And we know this is an explosive guy. We know he's got the pass catching upside. The whole Patriots team as a whole is a bit worrisome, but week one we make sweeping conclusions based off the usage we saw, and we said, well, Ramondre Stevenson's a workhorse. Antonio Gibson is useless. We said the same thing about Jerome Ford and Deonta Foreman. And then week two rolls around, and all of a sudden, these guys that we thought were going to be afterthoughts in the offense are now involved. You can see the same thing about Brees Hall and Braelon Allen as well. And now, when we're starting to take notice in week two, these guys that we'd kind of written off for dead after week one getting more usage, we don't want to ignore that. And Ramondre Stevenson, I think, is the better back of the two. But Antonio Gibson was, much like Braelon Allen, who we just talked about, kind of in like a 2-to-1 split, getting about 33% of the touches out of the backfield.
So, Dave, we've got about 10 minutes left to finish this show, or else we're going to get fired because we have to be somewhere. But I want to jump into the next Patriots player that we have here. Hunter
Mhm.
Henry is number 5 on our list. I actually have him at number 3. You've got him at number 5, so averaged out where we have him. But Hunter Henry led the Patriots in targets. This is the tight end position, just for lack of a better term, it just sucks.
Every year.
And if Hunter Henry is going to be potentially the lead target earner, even on a bad offense, I'll take it. I'll take a tight end who's getting 10 targets a game, 8 targets a game, even 7 targets a game. Just give me a talented player who's getting the ball thrown to him. And I think that's where I'm at with Hunter Henry. Like there's nothing super spectacular here. It's a guy who's getting targeted on essentially more than a third of his routes run. This seems to be the primary target for Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah, but the problem is week one, he was seeing the same snap and route role that he saw in week two. And in that game, he had 3 targets, 2 receptions, and 18 yards. So I'm not, I think Hunter Henry is just kind of in that tight end two tier where you're hoping that they have these big games, but you're also going to get games where you're going to get 1 or 2 or 3 points. And I wouldn't be crazy about putting Hunter Henry in your lineup. I understand what you're saying. He's coming off of really nice usage, but we also saw the usage in week one that was extremely disappointing. And, week three is going to be one of those ends of the spectrum or somewhere in between. Not crazy about firing up Hunter Henry. I think he just kind of falls into that sad, sad tier of tight end twos.
I will say this with Hunter Henry in week 1, he was coming off of an injury, so we
Mhm.
likely were not seeing him at full strength, even though he was out there. That's why there was so much Austin Hooper hoopla, so to speak. Let's go to our next guy. And this is, I think, what everyone wants to hear. So let's just talk about both of them together.
Yeah.
The running backs for the Kansas City Chiefs, Carson Steele, Samaje Perine. This is what people are worried about. Isaiah Pacheco, it appears that we're being reported a fractured fibula, could be out anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, maybe more. We're not sure, but we do know that it does not seem good. As of right now, the running backs on the roster that could take over for Pacheco are going to be Samaje Perine, fullback, H-back, whatever you want to call him, Carson Steele. And then we do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who should be off of IR within the next couple weeks. So, Dave, who are you going with here? Who is the Chiefs running back to roster going into week 3?
Between P. Ryan and Steele, I'd lean towards P. Ryan because of his pass catching upside. This is a guy that we've seen can provide decent fantasy production on a very limited role. Carson Steele, I think, is a fun player, but we don't want to get too excited. I feel like he's one of those guys that we say like, hey, pick this guy up off your dynasty waivers after your rookie draft is over because he's not going to get drafted in the first 5 rounds. Those guys very rarely become relevant in fantasy, especially as rookies. This is an undrafted fullback. And I think that his production on a weekly basis without Isaiah Pacheco is going to be very touchdown or bust When he's able to find the end zone, you'll feel good about it. When he's not, you're probably getting 3 to 5 points in your RB2 spot, where Pirine can take 3 or 4 targets in a game and rip off one big chunk play, and all of a sudden he's outscored Carson Steele on what Carson Steele can get, a dozen carries in between the 20s. So I'm not crazy about either of these guys because I think that touches are going to be split between the two of them. I also think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be in the fold at some point. And the other thing that I'll just throw out there is I don't think that the Chiefs are going to roll out what they've got right now, whether it's Khalil Herbert or Damian Pierce or Jerick McKinnon or Darrell Williams or Leonard Fournette. I think they add somebody else into this backfield. So I think Carson Steele and Samaje Perine are going to be the ones that people are spending a ton of fab dollars on this week. And it's one of those that if people are going to be spending 30, 40 plus percent, I'm okay kind of letting my league mates get these guys. I'll throw 5 to 8% on, and maybe I get lucky and get them in a league here or there. But I'm not crazy about either of these guys. If I have to pick one, it's going to be P. Ryan. But again, I'm probably okay letting my league mates get these running backs.
And I think that's the takeaway from here is I think a lot of people will be running out to their waiver wire and saying, I need to put 50% on one of these running backs or 75% and going nuts because, it's Kansas City Chiefs running back. And both of us sort of look at this as we're not going to know who to start. And even if you do start them, how much production are you really going to get? How long is that going to last? Do you get Clyde Edwards-Helaire back into the mix after 2 weeks? Dave, before the show, during the show, I mean, you mentioned this could not only just be a 3-headed backfield, but what's to stop a guy like Jerick McKinnon from coming back to this roster? And like, there's just so many different directions. I think that when we believe we understand the Chiefs, we know nothing. Like, we really know nothing about the Kansas City Chiefs. And we've thought about this for years, whether it's been with Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney and Xavier Worthy now. And like, we think we know what the offense is going to do, and we just have no idea. And that's how the whole story of Isaiah Pacheco even happened. This guy who just wasn't very well known, but he ran funny, and we're like, no. So I mean, like, listen, it could
Maybe
very
Carson
well
Steele could be the next Isaiah Pacheco.
It very well could be, but I don't think that either of us are going to suggest dropping 50% of your fab on one of these guys. If you're really desperate for a running back, I think you can go 15 to 20% at the highest, but understand that you're most likely getting an RB3 for the next couple of weeks with some RB2 potential if they get a touchdown. And I think that's what we're looking at here. So it depends on how much you're going to value that over the next 2 to maybe 3 weeks here for the Kansas City Chiefs. Dave, let's go to our final 2 players here. And at number 2, Andrei Iosivas, who
got it. You nailed it. Way to go.
I got it. He got 2 touchdowns this past week, but this is another guy who you're not as worried. You love him as a waiver wire pickup. I remain very skeptical because I think that all these wide receivers, whether it's Alec Pierce, Quentin Johnston, Iosivas, like, they all kind of fall into the same bucket for me where, yes, they've played well, but they've played well with other players out, and they've gotten touchdowns while not getting a lot of targets. One of these guys could potentially break out and be something, but I don't know that I want to spend either my waiver priority on that or a bunch of my fab on that. So even though he is really high on this list, I think we could say it now.
Still like a 10% guy. 8 to 10% is kind of where I'm at.
That's the thing, is we're deep enough into this episode that I can say it. And you can almost tell by our tone in this episode.
I don't want to start that episode off saying all the waivers guys are terrible, because then you guys would stop watching. But this is not a strong week for waivers. It really isn't.
Got you. We got
Thanks
you. That's what we need to do.
Leave a 5-star review. Thumbs up. Hit subscribe.
We need to start with more Mighty Ducks talk. That's what we need to do. So Andrei,
I like Iosivas. Yeah, I mean, he's a freak athlete. Like, this guy is just like 95th percentile athleticism across the board. 6'3", big, fast, like, does a lot of things that I like to see from a wide receiver. And of course, right now he's getting the opportunity because T. Higgins isn't there. But I don't know if, like, that's what we're worried about, is like a T. Higgins return. Just chopping the legs off of Andrei Iosivas. Sure, that might happen, but also, like, T. Higgins doesn't seem like he's pining to get back to the field anytime soon. We know this is a guy who has dealt with many injuries and complications, whatever it may be. Jamar Chase just seems like weirdly checked out right now, and I think that week 3 could be a good matchup going up against Washington. That's a game where Jamar Chase can get right again and beat up on that secondary, but it's also a game where Andrei Iosivas could end up having, I say his name different every time, but he could end up
Yes,
having a
you
big
do.
game where he gets behind this Washington secondary. So, again, probably not a guy that I'm clamoring to squeeze into my week 3 lineup, but the athleticism is there. Coming from a small school like Princeton, his learning curve into the NFL might have just taken a little bit longer, but this is a guy all offseason. We heard the drumbeat that they liked him and they wanted him to be a bigger part of the offense and that he was going to be on the field as much as possible. Now we're 2 weeks into the season and we have seen that, 100% snap share last week, 77% snap share this week. He's on the field, 5 targets per game in a good offense. It's not something to just completely ignore. So, throw 8 to 10% on, keep him stashed. And in your shallow leagues, you're probably just overlooking him and not even thinking twice. But I think he's worth a stash in leagues where you're starting 3 wide receivers or you have a deep bench.
Speaking of stash, let's get to our number 1 waiver wire ad here going into week 3. And it is Ty Chandler, running back for the Minnesota Vikings. He's available in 60% of leagues. Okay. So I know there are going to be people in the comments. We did this week 1, week 2, where we gave you players that are 99% available. And we've got people in the comments. He's not available in my league, bro. I don't know what to tell you. But for the 60% of you where Ty Chandler is available, this is a guy that I really want to go out and get, because we've talked about this, that there's not just the contingent upside for if a guy like Aaron Jones does miss time or goes down. He missed 6 games last year. It's very possible. This Vikings offense is so much better than we even thought. I mean, we speculated it could be pretty good with Kevin O'Connell, but they are looking really, really good. And they've been able to maintain the offense going, even when guys like Jordan Addison are out or Justin Jefferson misses some plays. Like they're still moving the ball pretty well. And Ty Chandler was a big part of that. 10 carries. I mean, Dave, I know he didn't get the passing work that we wanted, but Ty Chandler, 10 carries, 82 yards. It's one of those things we joke, genie's out of the bottle. Or wait, no, we got to say it wrong on purpose. Cat's out of the bottle, genie's out of the box, man.
Yep.
Ty Chandler, 10 carries, 82 yards to Aaron Jones, 9 for 32. Granted, could just be a one-off thing. I don't think that you're picking him up because of this performance. I think you're picking him up because we're seeing that the usage is there for him and that role could grow, and the handcuff value on a good offense is just astronomical this early in
And
the season.
we saw this last year too, where Ty Chandler on an efficiency basis was much, much better than Alexander Madison. And I think that we're going to see him much more efficient than Aaron Jones as well. This is something we talked about a lot this offseason. Why Ty Chandler was one of our favorite targets in drafts is because Aaron Jones misses on average 4 to 5 games almost every single season. So even if you're just getting 4 to 5 starts, like we've seen what a bloodbath it's been for running backs so far in the NFL this year, it's going to continue. It would be naive to think that everybody's just going to suddenly stay healthy in week 3. So Ty Chandler's a guy who can handle a big workload, has the ability to rip off breakaway runs, is on what is a surprisingly good offense. So this is what I like to do is just fill my bench up with these guys who are an injury away from being a potential top 10 running back. That's what Ty Chandler is. He's already shown that he can be efficient in this offense. If and when Aaron Jones misses any time, we're going to be looking at him as a top 10, top 15 running back. So rather than waiting for Aaron Jones to go down, pick him up, stash him now, and know that when the opportunity comes, you've got a free RB2 sitting on your bench.
And mind you, when Ty Chandler was getting those touches, and this can also be a negative, right? This can be the caveat. It's because Aaron Jones was off in the blue medical tent and he had to
Right.
leave the field due to injury. So you can kind of look at this. It's a Schrodinger's cat. Like you can look at this however you want. Ty Chandler only got these touches because Aaron Jones was off the field, or Aaron Jones is off the field, which shows that he's injury prone. However, just open the box and see what you want to see when it's there. I'm 99% sure I did not use that correctly, but that's what we're doing this late in the show. Dave, we're going to be back again tomorrow. We're going to be giving you our quarterback rankings for the rest of the season and kind of looking at how we are going to be tiering these quarterbacks, who you should be holding on to, who you can be dropping, who maybe you need to be trading for. And we're going to have special guest Jeff Bell joining us from the Football Guys Dynasty show. As always, want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. Be sure if you have any fun childhood, sports movies that Dave needs to watch, send that over to fantasyshow@footballguys.com. For myself, for Dave Kluge, I want to thank you guys. We'll see you next time. Adios.